When you ask someone what the three main world religions are, you can often hear a wrong answer: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The answer is wrong because the three major world religions are defined, among other things, by the number of followers and by not belonging to a particular ethnic group, so Judaism is not on the list. Yet these three faiths have a common name. They all are representatives of the Abrahamic religions. Some researchers criticize this term because it may give the false impression that the three religions have more in common than they actually do. Another part approves it precisely because the term emphasizes the closeness of these religions. In this video, we will try to briefly understand how these beliefs are similar and different, and trace their influence on each other. Let's understand the similarities and differences between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all are monotheistic religions, meaning they all believe in one God. And even more, the followers of the Abrahamic religions recognize that they believe in the same God, but they call him differently and see his nature differently. Also, representatives of each Abrahamic religion say that the other two misunderstand God's message to people. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all called people of the book. Therefore, the key role of the sacred text is common to all three. In Judaism and Christianity, these texts partially coincide. As you know, the most important book for Christians is the Bible, which consists of the Old Testament and the New Testament. So the Old Testament is actually the Jewish Tanakh. And the first 5 books of the Old Testament or Tanakh are the written Torah, the most important book of the Jews. The difference between the Old Testament and the Tanakh is primarily the order of the books and their number. Islam accepts the Torah and the Gospels, but says the Jews and Christians distorted the meaning of these books, so these texts are not included in the Islamic canon. Instead, Muslims have their own text, the Quran. Quran stories partially or completely coincide with the Tanakh and the New Testament. Muslims believe that the Quran is the culmination of God's revelation, the last book from God, after which there will be no other books. However, neither monotheism nor the role of sacred texts are distinguishing features of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, for there are other monotheistic religions, such as Sikhism and Egyptian Atonism. There are also other religions where texts play a central role, such as Zoroastrianism and Hinduism. So the feature that unites Christianity, Islam, and Judaism the most is the figure of Abraham. That is why they are called Abrahamic. All three religions give him a place of honor. In Judaism, Abraham is considered one of the founders of Judaism. In Islam, Abraham is the father of the ancestor of Arab people, Ishmael. And for Christians, he is one of the 3 spiritual fathers of mankind. In addition to monotheism, texts, and the figure of Abraham, these religions are united by history, as they have always coexisted side by side, emerged from each other, and influenced each other. Therefore, understanding each of them is impossible without understanding the other two. Even understanding Judaism, which is the oldest of the 3 Abrahamic religions, is impossible without understanding Christianity and Islam. It is also worth mentioning that modern Abrahamic religions are not monolithic, and today they are different from what they were at the beginning of their existence. Now let's take a closer look at the history of the Abrahamic religions, their texts, and the understanding of the nature of God in these religions. It is difficult to say exactly when Judaism emerged, but some of its proto-forms appeared in the 2nd millennium BC, long before the first Jewish religious text appeared. At that time, unique phenomena occurred in the Middle East. First, people proclaimed one God, and second, they entered into a treaty with him, and not just one. One of these covenants, according to Jewish tradition, is between God and Abraham, where God promises to give Abraham's children a permanent homeland. The second is between God and Moses. From now on, the people of Israel belong to the God who brought them out of Egypt. God promises to reward them for their obedience and to punish them for their disobedience. The life of the Jews in the 1st millennium BC revolved around the temple in Jerusalem, not around the texts. It may surprise you to learn that Tanakh took its current canonical form and became the foundation of Judaism at roughly the same time as the Bible for Christians. That is, after Jesus lived, and after thousands of years of Judaism. The book of the Tanakh were written at different times by different authors from stories that had been passed down for a long time. The Tanakh consists of 3 sections. The Torah, which can be translated from Hebrew as teaching the Nevi'im, prophets, and Ketuvim, scriptures. The Tanakh is divided into these parts according to the genres of the text. Christians adopted the Tanakh into their tradition, and so the Old Testament appeared, but with a different arrangement of books. In Old Testament, they are arranged in chronological order. The Psalms of David occupy an honorable place in both Judaism and Christianity. Before they appeared in books, they were sung in Jerusalem temple during worship. In the 4th century BC, Alexander the Great conquered the land of Israel. Before that, other empires had conquered the land as well, but in the context of the Abrahamic religions, it is the inclusion of Judah in Alexander the Great's kingdom that is important to us. Since then, the Jews have been influenced by Greek culture. Under the influence of Hellenism, some Jews even renounced their faith. Some rejected Hellenism outright, but most adapted it to Judaism to some extent. Because of Hellenization, some Jews began to speak Greek, and because of this, the first translation of the Tanakh into Greek appeared between the 3rd and 1st centuries BC. The name of this translation is the Septuagint. Christian translations into other languages were later created from this translation of the Tanakh, the Septuagint, and not from the Hebrew original. Thus, the book that appeared for Hellenized Jews later became much more important for Christians, and it was its book order that became the canonical order for the Old Testament. And the people who wrote the New Testament quoted the Septuagint, not the Tanakh. Later, as the popularity of the Septuagint grew, the Jews rejected it, and the Hebrew text compiled in Israel, not Egypt, like Septuagint, became their canon. Despite the growing role of texts, the Second Temple remained the central element of Jewish identity. Worshipping it was the basis for Jews in Israel and beyond. Jews were united around rituals and rules of conduct rather than around faith as such. Under Hellenic and later Roman rule, Jews had a hard time. They were repressed and they rebelled. The Romans, who tolerated different beliefs on their territory, could not assimilate Jews, because Judaism was not only a religion, but a religious, cultural, and political system. That is why in the 1st century AD, after Christ had walked this earth, Romans destroyed the main Jewish shrine, the temple in Jerusalem. This led to a complete destruction of the ritual part of Judaism and the formation of the role of the text as central. At the same time, synagogues became substitutes for the temple, places for prayer and storage of scrolls. Before that, synagogues were simply places for studying text and sometimes inns for pilgrims. Even the word synagogue in Hebrew conveys the essence of the synagogues of the temple era, Beit Knesset, which literally translates as house of assembly. And the oral Torah, the Talmud, complied in the 4th, 5th centuries AD, helped Jews to transfer the temple rituals into the system of Jewish law, the Halacha. Thus, the performance of daily rituals, which is a well-known feature of today's Judaism, replaced the performance of rituals in the temple. At that time, there were many different streams of Judaism, one of which, Am Israel, proclaimed that the God of Israel ruled over all nations, but ruled each nation in a different way. This can be considered as a proclamation of a universal God. All that remained was to proclaim that the one God is without ethnicity, and such a proclamation emerges from the Jewish matrix and the admixture of Hellenism. In the perception of Jews and Gentiles in the 1st century AD, Jesus was a Jewish preacher of an apocalyptic trend, and Christianity was one of the sects of Judaism. Only later did Christianity become something else, and it began to attract not only Jews, but also Gentiles. People who study the Bible generally agree that Jesus is not just a legend. He really lived and walked the hills of Judea. The divine nature of Jesus will not be discussed here. Rather, I am trying to present a historical view on the formation of the Abrahamic religions. The most important problem faced by historians studying the figure of Jesus is that the evidence about him is not contemporary with him. It appears long after his crucifixion. As we know, the Gospels are not direct testimonies. Despite the fact that the Gospels are unreliable sources for history, we can outline the life of Jesus. Born in Nazareth rather than in Bethlehem, he spoke Aramaic and worked as a carpenter or a builder. When he was about 30, he was baptized by the preacher John. Then he preached in synagogues in Galilee. As you remember, at that time synagogues were only places of study, not places of prayer. He gathered followers, infuriated the Jewish priest of Jerusalem with his sermons. Then the Jews handed him over to the Romans, and the Romans executed Christ. And on the third day, according to Christian tradition, Christ rose again. The followers of Jesus spoke of his resurrection, and interest in the new sect and the figure of Jesus grew. For the followers of Jesus, it was not what he preached that mattered, but what they believed him to be, the Messiah. By the end of the first half of the first century, Jesus' followers had a name, Christians. And then something unusual for Judaism happened. Early Christians, committed to the Torah and certain that Jesus was the Messiah, began to gather non-Jewish supporters. In other words, Christians crossed cultural and religious boundaries, whereas Jews did not seek new converts to Judaism, although there were pagans who became Jews by performing Jewish rituals. Christians tried to actively welcome pagans into their community. By the end of the 1st century AD, the majority of Christians were former pagans, and Jews who had recognized Jesus as the Messiah were a minority. Christian penetration of the Greco-Roman world eventually changed both cultures. While Judaism opposed Hellenism, Christians were active in Hellenism, and Jesus was known as the Christ, not the Messiah. Christ is actually the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew word Messiah or Mashiach, to be precise. Over time, Christians also absorbed Greek philosophy, adopting some of its teaching to support their own theology. By the end of the 1st century AD, many texts in Greek were circulating among Christians. 27 of them later in the 4th century AD became the canon of the New Testament. Although the Christian tradition attributes the Gospels to the disciples of Christ, historians agree that these texts were written by people who never met Christ. Now, a few words about the concept of the Messiah. Christianity takes it from Judaism, and actually on the basis of the Tanakh or Old Testament argues why Jesus is the Messiah. But at the same time, Christianity changes the very concept of the Messiah. In Judaism, the Messiah is a national liberational leader who will come and rebuild the temple in the land of Israel, while for Christians, the Messiah is the liberator of the world, who has overcome death and will return on the day of judgment. The acceptance of Christianity by non-Jews and the rejection of Jesus by most Jews contributed to transformation of Christianity from a Jewish sect into a separate religion. At the same time, Christianity began to form its own religious traditions. In the first centuries, something happened that determined how much Christianity would resemble Judaism. There were disputes between Jewish Christians and non-Jewish Christians over observance of the Torah. In general, Jewish Christians were in trouble. They were expelled from synagogues by other Jews because they believed in the messianic nature of Christ, and non-Jewish Christians suspected them of holding incorrect views, such as denying the virginity of Mary. By the mid-2nd century, the non-Jews Christians had won, because they outnumbered the Jews in Jerusalem, where the Romans had expelled almost all the Jews. Just imagine if things had turned out differently, Christians today could perform the rituals prescribed in the Torah that Jews do. Thus, although Christianity retained certain aspects of Jewish theology, it became a completely non-Jewish faith in the ethnic and practical sense. Subsequently, through centuries of persecution, Christians won the hearts of the Roman elite, and in 380 AD, Christianity became the official religion of Rome. I will talk about the thorny part of Christianity, the division into different streams that later became Orthodoxy and Catholicism, as well as Protestantism, in another video dedicated to Christianity. Here, it is only worth mentioning the perception of the nature of God in the context of the Abrahamic religions. Christianity accepts the Jewish concept of one God, but also Jesus as his Son and the Spirit who conceived him. This is where the complex concept of one God in three hypostases arises. And at the same time, there are discussions among Christians about the nature of Christ. Is he God, or is he a man, or both? In the end, Christians proclaimed that each essence in the Trinity is different, but of the same substance. And Jesus was born of God the Father before the beginning of time. And the Spirit comes from God the Father in the Orthodox tradition, or the Spirit comes from God the Father and the Son in the Catholic tradition. So this does not negate the concept of one God, but it causes misunderstanding among Jews and Muslims who believe that God is one without different hypostases. Now, the third Abrahamic religion. Unlike the first two, Islam did not originate in Israel, but in Arabia, an area fought over by different empires and inhabited by different religious groups. It emerged largely from Jewish and Christian ideas. This is evident even from the fact that Muslims themselves say that they have restored the true religion of Abraham. It is difficult to reconstruct the life of Arabia before Islam. Islam itself calls those times Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. In social terms, there were tribes in Arabia at that time, and local pagans worshipped idols, stars, and stones. One of these stones, which was worshipped even before Islam, became very important in Islam, the black meteorite in the Kaaba, in Mecca. In addition, they believed in gods and spirits, jinns. Representatives of many religions coexisted there because of migration and active trade in the region between the Sassanian state, Byzantium, and Persia. Judaism and Christianity were widely represented in what was then Arabia, and although some Islamic representatives say that Islam is exclusively a product of Arabia, and the Quran states that Islam predates Judaism and Christianity, the influence of the later two on Islam is difficult to deny. Muhammad was born in the 6th century around 570 AD in Mecca. The clan he was born into controlled access to the Kaaba. According to Islamic tradition, in 610 AD, he received his first revelation from the angel Gabriel. After that, he began to preach obedience to one God, the need for repentance, and faith in the day of judgment. He also began to fight against idols. This angered the inhabitants of Mecca because Muhammad scared away pagan pilgrims with his sermons, and those pilgrims helped the inhabitants of Mecca to earn money. Then, according to Islamic tradition, a miracle happened to Muhammad, a night journey during which he suddenly found himself in Jerusalem from Mecca and prayed with Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. It was then that Muhammad realized he was a prophet. The influence of Judaism and Christianity is easy to see even in this journey, because Muhammad prayed with the main figures of Judaism and Christianity. In 622 AD, Muhammad left Mecca and fled with his supporters to the city that we know today as Medina. It is from the date of Muhammad's migration that the Islamic calendar begins. In Medina, Muhammad considered the Jewish tribes to be equal to his supporters, the first Muslims. But when the Jews refused to recognize Muhammad as a prophet, this changed. Then the first Muslims reconsidered their traditions and rejected what they considered too Jewish. It is then when the direction of prayer of Islam changed. They used to pray to the direction of Jerusalem, but now they pray in the direction of Mecca. Muhammad gradually gained support and eventually conquered the inhabitants of Mecca religiously and politically. He made a farewell pilgrimage to the already loyal Mecca and died in Medina in 632. The Quran's relationship to the Tanakh and the Bible is different from the New Testament relationship to the Tanakh. Whereas the New Testament reinterprets the Tanakh and incorporates it into the Bible, the Quran remains independent, although it refers to Jewish and Christian books. The Quran mentions the prophets but omits Isaiah and devotes more space to the Virgin Mary than actually the New Testament, while Paul is not mentioned. In general, biblical events are retold in an original way. This is influenced by the historical and cultural distance between the land of Israel in the 1st century and Arabia in the 7th century. The Quran consists of 114 surahs, or songs or chapters, and according to Islamic tradition, these surahs were created by God in Arabic, and the Prophet Muhammad acted only as a messenger between God and people. That is why Muslims call all translations of the Quran into other languages not the Quran, but translations of the meanings of the Quran. Some scholars agree that Muhammad was probably illiterate, so he adopted the biblical stories from oral culture rather than from books. Therefore, the stories in the Quran differ from the way they are described in the Bible. The first complete texts of the Quran appeared after Muhammad's death in the late 7th and early 8th centuries. These texts differ in the order of the surahs and the usage of words. Later, one collection became canonical. The absolutization of one God and the struggle against idols in Islam, as well as in Judaism, has shaped the prohibition of presenting God and the prophets in human form. That is why there is nothing like Christian paintings or icons in synagogues and mosques. And that is why you can often see in the news that a new film about Moses or Noah is not shown in some Muslim countries where the laws of the state are dictated by the rules of Islam. More details about Islam and its streams will be in another video dedicated to Islam. Here I will only say that Muhammad did not leave a successor, and the first Muslims split into two camps. There was a dispute over who should be the leader of the Ummah, Muslims community, that led to the further division into Sunnis and Shiites. Christians have also been divided over disputes. But while Christians divided over the nature of God, Muslims divided over political and spiritual leadership. We have briefly dealt with the history of the Abrahamic religions. Let's now recall and highlight the main points. All three of these religions are monotheistic, believing in one and the same God. The nature of God is similar in Judaism and Islam. He is one and indivisible. In Christianity, it is slightly different. God is one, but in three hypostases, or images: God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now, the religious figures. Christianity fully accepts the Jewish prophets, and Islam partially accepts them. The main symbol of Christianity, Jesus Christ, God the Son, is not accepted by Jews as either a Messiah or a prophet, while Muslims accept him only as a prophet. The key figure of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, is rejected by both Jews and Christians. We also talked about books today. The Jewish Tanakh is fully accepted by Christianity, and it becomes the Old Testament. Jews do not accept the New Testament. Muslims recognize both the Tanakh and the Bible, but say that Jews and Christians have distorted versions of the texts. Instead, Islam offers the Koran, which partially coincides with the stories of the Tanakh and the New Testament. In its form, Islam is closer to Judaism, while Christianity differs from them because it was most influenced by Greco-Roman culture. In Islam, as in Judaism, all aspects of human life are regulated by religion. In other words, you must first observe all the laws and then you will be rewarded. This explains kashrut, hilal, daily prayers, and rituals. The Christian feature is that you have to believe and you will be rewarded. Rituals are not so important. At the same time, Islam and Christianity transcend ethnicity. You can become a Christian or a Muslim regardless of your ethnic group to which you belong. There is no such thing in Judaism. Yes, one can become a Jew by going through a complicated process of conversion that takes years, but unlike Christians and Muslims, Jews do not call anyone to do so. And finally, Abraham. By the way, Abraham's name is Abraham in Hebrew and Ibrahim in Arabic. As you already know, in Judaism, Abraham is considered one of the founders of Judaism. In Islam, Ibrahim is the father of the ancestor of the Arab people, Ishmael. And for Christians, Abraham is one of the three spiritual fathers of the mankind. We learned how he migrated from Judaism to Christianity and Islam. We will talk about the figure of Abraham himself, his life and deeds in a separate video. I hope you learned something new from this video. If so, please leave a comment. Let me know if you found the information in this format easy to understand, and write which books you have read or would recommend to others on the topic of Abrahamic religions. You can find the books I used in the preparation for this video in the description. Also, please write what videos would you like to see here. And please like and subscribe to this channel. It will motivate me to make new episodes. See you soon. Bye.